The first bodies from the Pan Am Flight 103 disaster were returned to American soil today, only hours after British experts confirmed what had been suspected for a week, that Pan Am Flight 103 was blown apart by a bomb, a disclosure that left some distraught relatives calling for revenge.
If they find it was a large organization in one of those countries to set that desert afire, it's the only thing, it's like the bully on the block. The only thing they understand is a 2x4 across the face.
This is the CBS Evening News. Bob Schieffer sitting in tonight for Dan Rather. Good evening. Well, the announcement today from British authorities confirmed what no one really wanted to believe, that someone deliberately caused the disaster that took at least 270 lives. We begin our coverage tonight in Lockerbie, Scotland, and Anthony Mason reports.
It was a week ago tonight that Flight 103 fell out of the sky, leaving a 100-mile trail of twisted wreckage and 270 victims. Today, investigators said the evidence was conclusive. It was a bomb.
The explosives residues recovered from the debris have been positively identified and are consistent with the use of a high-performance plastic explosive.
Investigators' first lead came when they found suitcases ripped with metal fragments. Scientific tests then detected traces of detonating explosive in two parts of the framework of the metal luggage hold. Search teams will continue gathering wreckage and debris, but airline engineers can now leave with a sigh of relief. Investigators have completely ruled out structural failure as a cause. In Lockerbie, where many families are still openly mourning their dead and waiting for their relatives to be identified, some today pleaded for restraint.
Let the people grieve, and if you go and try and retaliate against someone, it's just going to happen again.
It will be years before this small village recovers. Entire blocks were destroyed. 11 townspeople are missing, presumed dead. In Lockerbie today, they wondered why anyone would want this to happen to them.
Or whatever grievance they've got, it's got nothing whatever to do with these people, especially the people in Lockerbie.
With the cause determined, the investigation can now shift. Terrorism experts will take over from airline engineers to ask who planted the bomb and how it was smuggled on board. Anthony Mason, CBS News, Lockerbie, Scotland.
Investigators now believe that the bomb was most likely located in the forward luggage compartment of the Pan Am 747. We have a model here, and as you can see, one of the cargo doors is at the front of the plane. Now, here is what investigators think happened. When the bomb went off, fragments penetrated the plane's skin, the floor, and seats, and hit some of the passengers as well. The shock wave from the bomb was so powerful, it rocked the whole plane and blasted the cockpit off, and indeed a large section of the cockpit came down in one piece, some distance away from the rest of the plane's wreckage. One of the first clues that it was a bomb was the shrapnel damage investigators found. It looked a lot like this wreckage of a plane hit by a terrorist bomb in the 1960s. As for the investigation into who might have planted the bomb on Pan Am 103 and why, and what the U.S. response might be, here's Pentagon correspondent David Martin with the latest on that.
We are determined to get to the bottom of this and to find out who did it using all available U.S. resources, including the FBI.
And including a $500,000 reward for information leading to the arrest or conviction of any person who commits a terrorist act against Americans.
I think we've got a very good chance of solving it, maybe 75 or 80%. And the reason I'm confident is that in the past, when we've had major terrorist incidents, if that's what this turns out to be, we've been able to get to the bottom, even though it takes sometimes weeks or months.
But it's one thing to find out who did it, another to bring them to justice.
It is an extremely difficult task to take, and from the evidence which you gain, come up with a definitive conclusion that will stand up in a court of law.
The investigation is covering everyone who came in contact with Pan Am Flight 103, from passengers to crew to baggage handlers, and every piece of evidence which can be recovered from the wreckage.
We're most fortunate in that the plane itself crashed on land, and by and large, apparently the recovery of evidence is more accessible than it certainly would be if it were overseas.
While the FBI is looking for the maker of this bomb, the Federal Aviation Administration will try harder to stop the next bomb before it gets aboard a plane.
We understand the FAA intends to impose some additional countermeasures to further tighten security, which, until we know how this bomb was introduced onto the plane, will focus on passenger processing and cargo and baggage handling.
It's a kind of a race of technology, if you would. The terrorists, on the one hand, becoming more sophisticated with their weapons. We have to get even more sophisticated so we can detect their weapons.
One thing the FAA does not plan to change is its policy of not warning the public of terrorist threats against aircraft.
We get so many of these threats, dozens every week, that it simply would not be, in our view, responsible action on our part to make them all public. It would cause panic.
It is possible this was simply a criminal act, a plot to murder a passenger and collect the insurance, for instance. But the working assumption is that this was a terrorist attack, one of the worst ever against Americans. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
The finger of suspicion is pointing at radical Palestinian groups, men who see violence as the only way to win back their homeland and whose motive would in part be to wreck the chances of a negotiated settlement with Israel. Top of the list for the Pan Am outrage is Ahmed Jibril, Syrian-backed head of the radical Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command, an anti-Arafat group.
As a matter of fact, he likes smart gadgets very much, and as a terrorist has been quite ingenious, I think.
But there are other candidates too, grainy specters like Abu Nidal, who sent condolences to the Pan Am 103 victims but didn't deny guilt, and the even more shadowy Abu Ibrahim, master bomb maker of the vicious May 15 organization. This terror elite is protected by Arab leaders who have been accused of using terrorism as foreign policy.
The object was not that the bombing not be traceable. There's only one state that is clearly connected with a bombing capability. This is Syria.
The motives for terror are often obscure. No one claimed responsibility for the Istanbul synagogue massacre in 1986. Bombs on TWA planes served no specific cause. The Rome airport slaughter was claimed by several groups, but was never really attributed. So far, Pan Am 103 has been just as hard to pin down. A warning phoned in to the U.S. Embassy in Finland was the only clue to who might have destroyed Pan Am 103. That proved to be no more than a feud between two Arabs, smoke with no fire, more cover for the villains in the shadows. Alan Pizzi, CBS News, London.
White House correspondent Bill Plant is in California, where President Reagan is spending the holidays at his new retirement home in Los Angeles. Bill, I suppose the question is, what is the administration likely to do now that it's known that this was caused by a bomb?
Bob, the answer, I'm afraid, is not very much. The confirmation that this was indeed an act of terrorism comes at what is essentially an awkward time for the administration. Officials have absolutely no real idea of who was responsible. So they are not anxious for President Reagan to be involved in the issue because there is simply no positive payoff, no upside to it. The White House wants Ronald Reagan, of course, to go out in a blaze of glory in these final days, even as his effective power fades day by day. And getting stuck in the terrorism briar patch is not exactly what his staff had in mind. In fact, Mr. Reagan himself didn't even comment directly on the announcement that it was a bomb today. The only White House statement came from a deputy press secretary. Bob?
Well, public relations aspects aside, what if they do identify who's responsible for this? What do you suppose then, Bill?
Well, Bob, there are still serious problems because there is no real way to retaliate. You can't send bombers or missiles against a small gang of people, a handful of terrorists somewhere in the big Middle East. So the difficulties there also seem to outweigh the opportunities.
Thank you, Bill. Well, still to come tonight on the CBS Evening News, David Dow will have a report on deadly high-tech races between terror and safety in the sky, and Bruce Morton will report on the shock waves of grief and anger at the bombing of Flight 103.
It's nice to be noticed for what you wear and how you look. And if you wear dentures, it's nice to know Efferdent freshens up dentures and cleans away stains so well. With Efferdent, all they'll notice is you.
Today's conclusion that it was a bomb that blew Pan Am 103 out of the sky was the latest reminder that terrorists are capable of coming up with their own high-tech devices to outwit the latest airport security measures. David Dow reports on that.
In announcing plans today for tighter airport security measures, the FAA recognized the growing sophistication of terrorists and their weapons, the difficulty of detecting modern explosives. Today's bombs don't necessarily look like bombs. They may be lightweight, malleable plastics that can be molded into almost any deceptive shape.
People could strap it onto their legs. People can make the bottom of the soles of their shoes out of it. If they want to pack it in their luggage, they can roll it as flat as a sheet of newspaper.
Strategically placed, experts say less than 4 pounds of modern explosives could bring down a jetliner, though the bomb, which destroyed Pan Am 103, is thought to have been much larger. There is speculation that the explosive used was Semtex, a Soviet military plastic that is especially lightweight, almost odorless, and hard to detect.
There are in development pieces of equipment that will detect various kinds of explosives, and Semtex is not immune from some of those pieces of equipment.
But most of that equipment is many months from general use on passenger luggage. Standard X-rays may miss some non-metallic bomb-making materials. New dual X-ray systems in use in a few airports may display such materials in brownish yellow, but sometimes take further confirmation. There are bomb-sniffing dogs, but new machines are being developed that electronically sniff for telltale odors. And by midsummer, the FAA hopes to have the first 5 machines in operation that use neutron radiation to scan for plastic explosives.
In the test that we have done with our system that FAA has performed, we have been able continuously to detect that type of explosive.
But security officials aren't the only ones seeking better methods.
As we become more sophisticated in our security measures, our adversaries also become more sophisticated in defeating those measures.
Security experts admit no system can ever be foolproof. The hope is deterrence, a system tight enough that no one will want to challenge it. David Dow, CBS News, Los Angeles.
The government of Israel, of course, has spent years studying ways to prevent terrorist attacks on its own planes and giving advice to the airlines of other countries. The Israelis have some theories about the bomb that brought down Pan Am 103 and what needs to be done to keep it from happening again. And from Israel, Bob Simon has our report on that.
The bomb found in a tape recorder in West Germany last October, as this copy made by an Israeli security firm shows, had a timer and a barometer so sophisticated that it would not explode after the initial takeoff from Frankfurt, for example.
It does not explode after the first takeoff of the airliner. Only after the second or even after the third takeoff.
Israelis believe a bomb like this might have been responsible for the Pan Am disaster, that it could have passed through an X-ray undetected, that in general, terrorist organizations are getting smarter faster than the security forces protecting most airports and their lines. El Al is widely acknowledged to have the tightest security of all international carriers. The concept is to concentrate not on the baggage, but on the passenger, to identify suspicious travelers on the basis of a profile including appearance, documentation, and behavior.
Somebody coming to the flight in the last moment and trying to hurry you to check him very quickly because he's in a hurry, etc., etc. If you are trained, it should trigger you.
The El Al axiom number 1, technology cannot do the trick. You need the right people properly trained. Bob, the Israelis say that the people who did this are not suicidally inclined. It was very carefully planned and carefully executed. Their favorite theory, because they've seen so much of it, is what they call the half-innocent passenger. This is someone who's approached by terrorists posing as criminals who convince someone for a few hundred or a few $1,000s to do some smuggling, to carry diamonds, for example, to New York. What this half-innocent passenger does not know is that there are no diamonds, it is plastic, and it will explode.
Thank you, Bob. President-elect Bush stirred up an old controversy today by naming the number 2 man at the CIA, Robert Gates, to be his deputy assistant for national security. Gates was President Reagan's first choice to head the CIA after Bill Casey died, but the nomination was withdrawn when questions were raised about Gates's role in the Iran-Contra affair. Gates once helped Casey prepare what many considered misleading testimony to Congress about Iran-Contra. Gates denied he was involved in a cover-up attempt. another Eastern jet that was forced to make an emergency landing Monday in West Virginia. Mark Phillips has our report.
The damage caused to the Eastern 727, which was forced down in Charleston earlier this week, has now prompted the airplane's builders to consider drastic corrective surgery for all its planes built before 1971. Boeing says that thousands of rivets on hundreds of planes may have to be replaced.
Generally speaking, you re-rivet the aircraft at that joint that needs attention.
The action is being considered because of the discovery of another crack in yet another Eastern 727, discovered during an investigation prompted by Monday's incident. This plane is now sitting in a hangar in Boston, where federal inspectors today flew in to have a closer look. The new crack is also toward the rear of the 727, the same area as the tear that forced down the Eastern flight on Monday. This plane is 24 years old. It's been through almost 55,000 of the takeoff and landing cycles that are thought to be the main cause of the wear and sometimes tear of these planes. But the inspectors in Boston today found that corrosion led to the cracking. And CBS News has learned that 2 other problem planes have been found since Monday. Another Eastern 727 has been grounded in Miami, and multiple cracks have been found on an Eastern DC-9 in Atlanta. These discoveries follow a series of incidents involving older planes. In addition to the Eastern flight downed in West Virginia this week, American Airlines had a 727 make an emergency landing in Detroit last May due to cracking. Continental found a large crack when it was repainting a 727 in Los Angeles in September. And of course, Aloha Airlines had a flight attendant die when the roof tore off a 737 over Hawaii last April. As part of its increased vigilance, the Federal Aviation Administration today carried out a snap inspection of aircraft in San Francisco. But the FAA says it will not immediately insist on any massive repair program for this country's aging fleet. It will wait until the exact causes for the recent rash of problems is known. Mark Phillips, CBS News, Washington.
There's another big story today. Federal regulators announced multi-billion-dollar bailouts of 6 insolvent savings and loan associations in 2 states. Those are the only latest moves in a government program which could rescue as many as 200 ailing thrift institutions this year. Business correspondent Ray Brady is here with that story.
It cost the government $6.8 billion today to put them back on their feet. American Savings and Loan in California, the nation's #2 savings bank, and in Texas, 5 insolvent thrifts given new life, adding up to the biggest savings and loan bailout in history. From 48 savings and loans bailed out last year, government regulators have rescued 182 in 1988, with more to come by year's end.
These decisions are going to bind the federal government for decades. They're going to hurt the taxpayer one way or another.
Because, say critics, the government is giving away the store to new owners, like those who took over the ailing Texas thrifts today.
It's like waving a wand, and we had that wand waved over this institution last night.
Not only is the government putting up the bulk of the bailout money, it's giving big tax benefits to the new owners, along with virtual guarantees of profits for up to 10 years. Still, government regulators say it's the best way to keep the system going.
But as of September 30th, there were 86% of the institutions in the country that were solvent. As of January 1st, there were fewer than 80%.
But while the new owners may make money, how well will the rescued S&Ls do?
In effect, the Home Loan Bank Board is using some of the same tactics that the managers of these defunct S&Ls used. They are trying to push the losses into the future, to hide reality rather than to grapple with it and resolve things quickly.
What we ought to do is belly up to the bar, put the money that we have to put on the table, and close these things down.
President Reagan's budget out next month reportedly will contain about $5 billion to help the thrifts. The first time taxpayer money has been earmarked for that, though the government estimates of the final bailout bill run as high as $112 billion. Bob?
Thank you, Ray. Incidentally, researchers said today that a survey of high school students in 40 states reveals an alarming rate of economic illiteracy. The study found a majority of students could not define such basic economic concepts as profit or demand. Of those who died aboard Pan American Flight 103, today's confirmation that a bomb caused a tragedy only added to the grief. For some, it meant more anger. Bruce Morton reports.
The first bodies came home today, and we learned finally that it had been deliberate, that someone wanted to kill our wives, our husbands, our children.
Oh, God, what did you do to me?
Florence Bissett lost her son Kenneth and does not know why.
Parents would love to have a child like him. How could they do that?
Siobhan Mulroy's house is full of empty Christmas stockings. Her father and 5 other family members died. She wondered why they weren't warned of the threats.
I mean, why did they do this? Was it for profit? I mean, were they afraid that they would lose flights? Were they afraid that they would lose passengers?
We informed the diplomats, but we didn't take care of our young.
Not Joan Boulanger, not her daughter Nadine. Some, like George Williams, whose son died on Flight 103, wanted to hit back.
If they find it was a large organization in one of those countries to set that desert afire, it's the only thing, it's like the bully on the block. The only thing they understand is a 2x4 across the face.
The only way is to do it direct, hit them where they are, and fine. There'll be 107 third world nations screaming and yelling at the United States. They scream and yell at us anyway.
I'm tremendously saddened by the possibility that a human being could have done this.
For the families, sorrow and anger. For the surging holiday crowds at American airports, a different question. Is it safe to fly? In Chicago, Jane Jacka and Marianne Nardi went ahead with their trip to Rome, but cautiously.
I don't travel with things that would point me out as an American. I even have shopping bags that I brought from other countries.
We are very vulnerable as Americans. I mean, that's been pointed out time and time again.
I would not fly American carriers, period, inside or outside the country.
Others said it didn't bother them.
It's going to happen if it's going to happen. There's not much you can do.
When I heard it was a bomb, I was relieved because at least to know what it wasn't structural failure.
And once doors closed and the plane gets in the air, there's nothing you can do about it then. So.
In Stamford, Connecticut, they mourned Thomas Schultz and wrestled with questions all the country shares. Why? Who? Can we hit back? And where, in the sky or on the ground, does safety lie?
And that's the news. Bob Schieffer sitting in tonight for Dan Rather. Good night.
Joseph Roquet suffers from frequent sinus headaches.
I have nothing but...
What are your FlexiBlocks now for $19.90?
Need Tylenol Sinus with the maximum strength.
This is CBS.
Kids get their toys at